Oh, now I get it. The man behind the desk says. He looks at the name above my head. You were speaking to this other Barry earlier when you were on the transceiver. Reminds me of how I used to be friends with two other Barrys when I was a kid. How we all had to give ourselves nicknames to keep things from becoming too confusing. Yeah, that's how we find it in my homeland too, Hardwick says. Whenever there are other Hardwicks around, people just used to call me Dwarf. Maybe we could find some nickname for a Barry too, like Barry the Improviser or Barry the Reckless. Just Barry is fine, thank you very much, I say. Don't be like that, Reckless. Hardwick says with a grin. I'm sure you would find a nickname that would be to your liking, or we could add your father's name at the end of your name. Kind of like how those nobles on the western continent like to add their family names at the end sometimes to make themselves feel more important. What do you say? You don't have to force him to use a nickname if he doesn't want to. The man behind the desk says, I already have an old nickname that I'm used to, so you can call me by that name if you feel that it would be less confusing. My old nickname used to be Thundercloud. Hey, that's not a bad nickname, Hardwick says. Alright then, Thundercloud. Would you mind telling us what exactly is this place? Have you been teleported below the city or? I think so, the man behind the desk said. Remember that they told me about it during my initial briefing when this has been a long time since then. Doctor, you had a briefing somewhat recently. You remember if the teleporter is located below Olinder or not? Yes, this teleporting device was placed somewhere below the center of the city, I believe, Layla's father says. But we are very far below. The ceiling that you see high above us is made of a massive layer of ceridium. As far as I know, there is no other way to reach the surface than to use this teleporter. These underground tunnels stretch for miles and miles. However, it is not impossible that there are some exit that leads to the surface somewhere. But it's like a huge labyrinth down here, so you would most likely to get lost and starve to death than to find your way out. How did you manage to find us? Layla writes. Were you just passing by, or did somebody tell you that we would be there? We've been following you since you entered the city, says one of the Raidzek's two guards, who is called Albert. The two of us, I mean not Dr. Raidzek, the doctor told us once that the daughter had silver hair, so as soon as we saw you in your group, we immediately contact Barry over there so he could tell the doctor and teleport him to the surface. When we saw you pick a fight with the royal guards, we panicked a little, but we managed to convince the king of the underground to send some of our men to create a diversion at the temple where they were holding the ceremony, in the hopes that this would get the royal guards off our back. Wait a second, nonsense. So you're saying that you were the ones that set off the explosion? Some of my comrades did, yes, Albert says. We knew that the king tends to teleport the royal guards to his position whenever he feels that his life may be in danger. So we figured that an explosion would be more than enough to scare him a little. What happened to your friends that set off the explosion? Are they all safe? How did they manage to pull it off? Didn't they have people guarding their place? Wasn't this a little risky though? Why did your friends agree to do it just for you? Just for us? What happened to your friends? Let's ask them. We have contacted them before, calling out to you. And they managed to get away in time, says Peter, the second person accompanying Layla's father. They will probably be joining us here soon, after they are done with the business they had on the surface. You mentioned something about a king of the underground earlier, Luna says as she looks towards Albert. Who is this person exactly? The king of the underground is the leader of this small underground society and a very generous sponsor of our resistance movement, Albert says. He was gracious enough to provide us with the base of operation in these underground caverns. He also gave us very many useful tools which have been great in our efforts to undermine the tyranny of the mad king of Erlander. In return for his investments, the king of underground has asked us to not take any actions without his explicit consent, and also agreed to sometimes go on missions personally requested by him, even if they are not always directly related to usurping the king from above. So you guys are trying to start a rebellion then, Hardwick says. Not exactly, Albert says. We would prefer to avoid a civil war as much as possible. We do not want the blood of our brethren to stain the soil of the city. All we want is to get rid of the rotten leadership that has plagued this kingdom for many years. Now we'd prefer to do it in a way that requires as little bloodshed as possible. When we told the king of the underground that you were fighting the royal guards, he took an interest in your group, which is why he decided to help you. He said that he would like to meet you as soon as possible, in the hopes that he could convince you to join our cause, or at least form a temporary alliance with us. Anyway, we should not just be standing here. Our base of operation is a little further down these corridors. Please follow us. We will take you to our waiting room. See you later, Barry, Lila's father says as we all move towards Albert Move to follow Albert inside one of the tunnels. Oh, sorry, I meant to say Thundercloud. It's going to take a while to get used to that name. Later, Doc, the man behind the desk said, I'm really glad they finally find your daughter. Father, why do people call you doctor? Leela writes, have you begun practicing medicine since you arrived here? I think it's mostly just because of this white lab coat that I usually wear in order to avoid staining my clothes with oil when I work on my devices. Leela's father said, it resembles the coat that typically worn by doctors in hospital. The people are here kind of needed to give me a nickname since my real name is rather hard to pronounce. It's just that the lab coat doctor is more than the lab coat doctor, Peter says. The first time we met you, you almost got arrested by the city guards because you were giving medical assistance to one of our comrades who was severely injured during one of the missions. If you hadn't been there to help him, he might well have died from blood loss before we would have reached him. You've also helped us fix some of our healing devices, which has been used to save many lives in the past. We're all very grateful for the work you've been doing since you came here. You don't have to thank me, Peter, Leila father says. I'm also grateful to you all for having been kind enough to provide me with a place to live when I had nowhere to go. I only hope that the work we are all doing here will not be in vain. I would very much like to be able to one day live with my daughter above the surface of the city without having to fear for our lives every day. By the way, just in case I forget, if when I finish this book I forget, please do remind me. In chapter 2 I have to go all out with the fight against the what is his name, Gontork or whatever, because like that fight, I do believe I may have the stats for that, and I'm sure the ideal playthrough would make sure that I have the stats for that, because that would be hard as hell. I really want to, because that sounds so much fun. That sounds insanely fun to be able to fight him like with all fucking stats out, because I remember the first time I did that was I think it was chapter 2 or 3 or something like that. There was a scene where Kate is surrounded by a bunch of like normal people with a bunch of like fucking weapons and stuff, and it was like I had like 3 strength or something like that, and it like went like you could choose that, and basically my character grabbed trees and threw it on people. It was super cool. So I really want to see what the combination of so many different stats would do. You know, to thank me, Peter. Yeah, we already did that. I'm also grateful to you all for having been kind enough to provide me with a place to live when I know where to go. I only hope that the work we're all doing here will not be in vain. I would very much like to be able to one day live with my daughter above the surface of the city without having to fear for our lives every day. Is that bad in the city, huh? Hardrick says. Yes, Albert says. The king just does whatever he wants, and if you are so much to look at a guard the wrong way, you might find yourself disappearing from your house the next day, never to be heard from again. We are all very lucky that we get to live in these underground cabins. There just isn't enough space here to fit all the inhabitants of Volunteer, not to mention the most of our air is coming from these plants you see growing on the wall, and there just aren't enough of them to provide a suitable environment for that many people. I've never seen plants like these before, Darren says as he's still limping closely behind. What are they called? I don't think anyone has named them yet, Della's father says, but they seem to be a special kind of plant that is adapted to survive with only the few nutrients provided by these ceridium rocks and the dim light coming from these blue crystals. They must also have very strong roots, because these ceridium walls are most certainly not easy to cut through. But just remembered something that I forgot to tell you all. Albert says these thick ceridium walls and ceiling make it almost impossible to contact anyone from the outside through a transceiver. So if you ever want to send a message through a transceiver, So if you ever want to send a message to anyone on the surface, you'll need to contact Barry or go to the teleporter room yourself, because that's the only place where there is a little enough ceridium in the ceiling that doesn't completely block out all the magical waves sent by the transceiver. Speaking of the teleporter, I say, would it happen to be the same teleporting device that transported us tournament participants to Warathia? The answer to that is no, by the way. The reason I'm reading like this is actually not a video anymore. This is just a still frame, as it so happens that I somehow lost the recording for about like a minute or two after this, just about to like the next page. I will be reading the next page. I do have that open, but I can't really read this page, otherwise I will have to comb through like 42 minutes of 42 minutes of saved files, because I'm not doing that. That would take too much time. But yeah, so basically it's just like, is this the same device? It's not. The scale of that device is too high, and it would be in a different location, would be have more guards around it, and it would be far more taxing, I suppose, and big. That's pretty much what they say, and I'm just gonna move on to the next page, because I don't believe that there's anything else of importance below this line. It's like one or two more paragraphs after this.